Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on evolving governance and establishing the new normal. My name is Chris Swan, and I'm the chair of Lionheart Academies Trust. It's a group of schools in Leicester and Leicestershire, so you can imagine the sort of week we've been having. I started governance 24 years ago when my youngest was in EYFS, and I was baking biscuits, and one of the teachers came and said, "Do you think you might be interested in being a governor?" And as a result, 24 years later, here I am. I have both the chair role and the governance professional role. I've done that since we started 6 years ago. But this year we're moving to having those as separate roles. I do them as a volunteer, and we're moving going forward into having someone in a paid role for the governance professional lead. And we're delighted to have you with us. The theme that we're working with today is about governance and how it's changed in the light of COVID. And really what we want to do is give you a whistle-stop tour through our experience going through COVID, which we don't see as being exceptional or different, or many things will resonate with the things that you've been facing. But what we want to do is pick up some of the questions it's raised for us about what we might do going forward in terms of governance, both as a trust and in the schools. So we hope you're managing to keep safe and well. This has been a really difficult time, and I think because governors are so keen to make sure that everything is good in the schools, it's been particularly difficult for governors in this time, trying to work out how best to be supportive and not get in the way. Governance is a crucial role, and especially in a time of crisis where we can stand alongside the community and also bring some checks and balances. So this presentation and the PowerPoint that goes with it will be available at the end. There'll be a link that will be sent to you, but you're very welcome to get in touch with Kath, the CEO, or I, to ask anything later. So I'm going to hand over to Kath, who's going to talk us through the schools that we have and the context we're working in.
Hi, so I'm Kath Kelly. I'm CEO of Lionheart Academies Trust. And we've been a growing trust, a rapidly growing trust, but one of the things that I think works particularly well for us, and one of the reasons I think we've had some of our success, has been our strong link with governance and the way it's evolved. So we're very happy to have you with us and be sharing our experiences of that with you today. As you can see, this is our family of schools. So we are quite a diverse multi-academy trust, although we're all very much focused in and around Leicester. So you can drive from our school that's furthest south to the one furthest north in about 30 minutes. So we're all quite compact. We have currently 6 secondary schools and 4 primary schools, with a new 6th form due to open in September. Our schools are incredibly diverse, with some being majority from ethnic minorities, whereas we have some that are almost all white British. We have some that are very low in terms of free school meal take-up, and we have some that are way above average on that. So it really is a mixed bag of schools. And this is our vision, and it's really important, I think, that we share this with you now. And we're keen to share it with you because it governs absolutely everything that we do. So we firmly believe, and we'll come on to this in a little while, and it's been really useful to have this as our absolute bedrock during the period of lockdown and during these unprecedented times. But we are committed to the idea that every young person deserves a chance to be successful, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what support they may or they may not have. And at times that means treating each person very differently. So it's all about equity for us rather than necessarily equality. We believe that for young people to be successful, they need good qualifications, the very best qualifications that they can attain so that doors are open to them. But actually, when we look at the gap between those from the private sector and then those from the state schools, clearly the children from the state schools are disadvantaged somewhere along the way. And we believe quite often that's to do with their holistic development. So we work very hard with pupils on building their confidence, building their resilience, building their self-esteem, and ensuring they're exposed to a wide range of opportunities and activities that will make them stand out when they go for interview, whether it be for an apprenticeship or employment, whether it be for one of the most competitive university courses. And that has driven us all the way through. So pass back to Chris now.
In terms of how we organise the governing bodies, we have 3 different layers. We have local governing bodies, and we're very committed to keeping those. They focus on the experience of the children and their families and the staff. It's very much around teaching and learning in a local context, holding that to account and making sure that the school is a good fit for the local community and meets the needs of the community. Then at hub level, we have 2 hubs, a North Hub and a South Hub, and each of those covers a group of schools. It's made up of some local governors and some trust board members, as well as some people with external expertise, and they look at all the operations side, so estates, finance, HR and IT in particular. And then the board, which has a group of committees and also has the main trust board meeting. So what I want to do is talk you through some of the things that the way that we've evolved really in terms of technology, but also in our thinking. And there'll be an opportunity for questions on the Q&A board, and we'll pick those up all at the end. So starting 2 weeks before lockdown, we were working as we had been for probably a year, 18 months. GDPR meant that we'd brought in some new ways of working so that we only used Office 365 and Governor Hub for sharing information so that it was secure. That had a bit of a kickback, and we'd found that some of the governors weren't reading the packs because they weren't paper and arriving in the post. So we'd gone to a mixed model where some people had electronic and some people had paper. The ones that went in the post only had the non-confidential information. And we generally looked at the development plan, the data. Each meeting had at least one deep dive where we'd take a priority area and look at it in more detail. So at the moment, if we were looking at reading, we might read some of the Alex Quigley in advance, the new reading book, and maybe something from Ofsted about reading. And then we'd come with that and discuss and debate about how that might be best delivered within the local context, given the knowledge that the parents bring and the knowledge of the local community that the governors bring around what the library's running, what's working for parents, what might be difficult. And then looking at visits, and inevitably in this era, with Ofsted changing its focus, we've been looking at curriculum presentations from the leaders. We've had a virtual meetings policy for a long time, but haven't used it very much. We had some meetings over the last couple of years where we needed to get the board together in a hurry during the working day, and we'd have a set of mobile phones on the table, and it was all very clumsy. We'd have 3 people in the room at least who would talk, and people on the phones would talk over the top and they'd try and engage with us, but it was very clunky. And we just moved to using conference calls, which were a bit tricky as well and a bit cumbersome trying to get in. And in February half term, I was very proud of myself for doing some PowerPoint presentations that had sound with them, where you would go through the PowerPoint as if it was in a training session, click on a little icon, and it would tell you the things that I would have been saying had I been in the room. And I thought I was reaching state of the art, and now I'm going to ditch the whole group of them and start again with Teams, because we've jumped so far in such a short time. So 1 week before lockdown, at the point where we still didn't know, those of you who lived through this will remember, at the beginning of the week, we didn't know when lockdown was coming. And by the end of the week, we knew it was the following Monday. And we'd moved to a mixed model where we have a meeting once a week where we have all of the senior leaders and executive team from across the trust in a room together, and we talk about what's happening and update. And in this meeting, for the first time ever, on the screen we had Teams running, and we had 2 members of staff who were self-isolating, and they were on the screen absolutely enormous because it was a big screen. None of us yet had worked out the protocols about how to hide behind shutting down the camera, how to interrupt a meeting to be able to talk. Those of us who were face-to-face weren't quite sure how to integrate the people who were on the Teams call. But the focus of that was the lockdown is definitely coming, and Kath gave a very strong a powerful reinforcing of the vision that said any young person must get an equal chance when we have the lockdown, and that's going to be very difficult to deliver. And there was a new narrative that was emerging in the community as well, but that Kath used very strongly, about how we're public servants, going beyond this being a vocation into something that, in a time of crisis, given that we are that everybody in a trust is employed by the government as a public servant, anything might be asked of us in the way it was of the NHS, and that in a time of crisis, the school leaders needed to be civic leaders as well as school leaders. And by the end of the week, Ben, who's wonderful and is the Director of IT, had created a new VLE that stretched across all of the schools. And it had been populated. It was a remarkable piece of work, I think. We'd had VLEs in different schools, but not all of them were up to date. Some schools weren't used to using them. So to have one where we could share everybody's resources in the one place would be much more efficient. And we'd set up 2 key worker schools, one in each hub. And we closed down the schools on Friday afternoon, and everybody fast-tracked Teams training and VLE training so that we could be ready on the Monday to deliver. And the senior leaders were given the strength, really, to have that moral purpose to go back to their schools and say, it may not be comfortable for you to go above and beyond, it may not feel comfortable to be going into key worker school, but if we don't do it, the community around us will dry up. It will grind to a halt because it needs the support of the schools. And if it's something that you're being asked to do that you've never been asked to do before, usually we would try and accommodate that and take you with us, but this is a time of crisis and we just need to do what we need to do. And it was a really powerful meeting, and everybody left then and went and set everything up ready for the Monday. We had a discussion in the first week of lockdown about what we should do with governance. We'd just finished a series of all of the meetings that were happening for the spring, and we were now at a time where we had a bit of a lull and we had a bit of time to breathe. The government was saying that we should make sure that governance was only immediate and light touch, that it shouldn't be getting in the way of the job that the senior leaders needed to do, but it should still be holding to account. And that was a bit tricky, that balance. There was some talk nationally about groups, trusts that were understandably choosing to take local governing body roles out and change the scheme of delegation and say, we'll take it all to the central point because we can act more quickly. But our local governing bodies on the whole are influencing decisions and they're challenging them, but they're not the holders of decision making on the whole. So we didn't really need to do that. And we feel we've invested a huge amount in the relationship we have with local governing bodies. We really value them. They come along with us, they have goodwill for the schools, and we didn't want to break that by saying the rest of the time when there isn't a crisis, you're important to us and now suddenly you're not. And we felt that might be the message that would go out. And we also wanted the insights that they bring. They live in the local community, they understand what parents are saying, they hear things on the grapevine. And they've been great for that. And they've been real community champions. When they've been in the supermarket and they've been challenged or out on the street, they've been able to, because they understood what was happening, they've been able to share that and to be champions of what we're doing. So I've attended the weekly, we have 2 exec team meetings a week and a heads meeting, and I've attended those through Teams. And I've been able to share updates with, weekly updates with everybody in governance about what's going on and with the trustees. I've had chairs meetings and I've worked with chairs to work in advance of a meeting with their governors to set up understanding teams and being able to work with that. So in that first week, we had a board meeting. We'd never done it on Teams before. Some people were used to electronic meetings through work, but most weren't. My feeling was that the main job that the board needed to do, and one that isn't always captured in the paperwork that goes around governance, was about guarding the backs of senior leaders. These were difficult times and there were going to be some difficult decisions to make that were risky and potentially put people in an exposed position. And by saying the board has looked at the recommendation, has tested it, looked at the assumptions, and collectively made a decision, taking responsibility for that decision, should something go wrong in the future, at 4 o'clock in the morning, when you have a senior leader who's worrying about the impact of the decision that was made, there's that sense that we made it together and that they're not on their own in having to face the community with the outcome of the decision. So what I really wanted from the board was that they brought their thinking skills and their skills from industry and all the different backgrounds that they bring, and that they'd bring that to the things that were being presented to them. And it was, in many ways, it was a much quieter meeting than I'd expected. There was a lot for everybody to take in. I absolutely understood that. And it was on Teams, and they weren't used to the protocols of how we would make things work. But it was more quiet than we really needed. So between that and the next meeting, which was soon after, I decided that what we needed to do was make sure that everybody asked a couple of questions in advance, having read through the paperwork. At that point, you couldn't do hands up on Teams. Thankfully, that's been introduced. So people would put on the chat board that they had a question that they needed to ask. And we've kept the chat board running since then, even with the hands up, so that there are two routes into asking questions. I named the agenda items with the person who I would come to at the end of that item to ask them questions, what questions they wanted to raise. And we had extended PowerPoint presentations so that we didn't have documents being pulled up and down the whole time, which can be a distraction. And that worked really well. And I think the second meeting that we had was the best up until then that we'd had in the whole time the board had existed, because everybody was very, very engaged. And even the most introverted, who might have really profound things to say, had an opportunity to get into the conversation without needing to force it in any way. We've also, as a trust, always been very committed to research and to networking. So we've recently joined the Confederation of School Trusts, which I found to be amazing during the lockdown and would recommend to anybody. So Leora, who heads it up, is part of the sector leader team who discuss with the DFE about what's happening in education, and is very wise, has some profound and interesting things to say. There's a daily update which says what's happening, interprets what's happening from the government, but also says what's happening around education and points to various things that you can chase up and have a look at. Things like keeping children safe in education coming through recently, a summary of the changes and information on where you could go for more detail on that. And there's a chairs forum as well, which is every other week, which you have access to as part of the membership, and a CEO one that goes alongside that. Kath's been in the LA meetings. We stretch between Leicester and Leicestershire, so there are two LAs. She's joined the CEO and heads meetings for that. And then there's a forum strategy group as well. But we also wanted to know in the research what the parents and the staff and the students were saying. So we did a survey early on, which was really helpful, and particularly picking up some of the things around which students had access to IT and which ones didn't. There have been some parent focus groups talking about how the parents have experienced lockdown and what they would hope for going forward in what we offer. And then governors have been in touch informally just to say, I think you could do with this as the way that you approach a letter that goes out to parents, the emphasis on this would be better than that. And that's been really helpful. And those conclusions of the research have then been brought to the board. And Kath will talk through some of the challenges we've had at that point.
Thanks, Chris. I think it's important to share a few bits really, and for me, as Chris has said, this has been an incredibly daunting time. We're obviously all working and we're making decisions in an unknown landscape, I would say. We're trying to understand what is for best. However, none of us really know that, and ordinarily, if we weren't sure about what we should be doing, I would typically do quite a lot of reading around it. I would read about what was happening and what had happened in the educational sector, maybe in our own country, maybe further afield, and potentially other industries. But obviously that reading doesn't exist, and and those things aren't there to necessarily take advantage of. EduTwit has been hugely helpful, and we've been following certain people on there and involved in those discussions and debates. But as well as that, our governors and trustees particularly have made a big difference to us as an executive team, especially because, as Chris has said, there has been challenge and we have been encouraged to rethink things and move them along and do them potentially differently. But there's also been support, and that has felt really encouraging and really empowering, actually. The other thing that the board has really brought, I think, is support from a wide range of industries. So they've been able to say, well, in similar times, or would you consider this, or this is what we're doing in our workplace. And that has also helped. So the board has helped in terms of giving us confidence. They've helped with their challenge. They've helped with sharing their experience of their own industries. But the other real thing that has helped is staying true to our vision, because we have a group of people, whether they be the professionals in our schools and the central team, or the trustees and governors, who are all committed to the same vision and aligned to that vision, a vision that's been shared many, many times and is referred to over and over and over again. And so that's been huge. So for that reason, we made certain decisions just before the lockdown. So we knew we were closing on March the 23rd, and we knew we had to be up and running by March the 26th with a robust educational platform. We decided with that we would really work hard on trying to take staff and parents with us. And so we decided that we would encourage staff to come at their own rate of development and accept that not everybody would be able to do exactly the same amount or operate in the same way. We decided we would have this whole range of functionality on our online platform, that we would actually roll it out bit by bit each week, so that every week the students were not only getting new knowledge or new content delivered to them, but actually they were getting to interact differently with their peers, with their teachers, and over the platforms. And so now we're in a point where we have a whole range of functionality, with all of our young people with access to it, having a range of different types of feedback, different types of interactions. From day one, we've monitored engagement of our young people really carefully, and then we stepped it up from engagement to fully meeting expectations. So each week, each child has clear expectations set for them across maths, across English, across science, etc., etc. And then at the end of each week, we will assess whether each child has met the expectations that were set for him or her. That data is then analysed by our central trust team, and from there the information is shared with school leaders. So at the beginning part of the following week, school leaders will be making calls home to pupils and to parents to say, actually, you've done really well last week, we're ever so pleased with you, keep going, there are these rewards. Or you did well in this, but you didn't actually complete this, was there a barrier? And so then we've been able to work with young people, work with families to overcome those barriers. And as a consequence, every single week, our online engagement levels and pupils meeting expectations has gone up. And that's gone up across pupil premium students. It's gone up across all different ethnic groups. It's gone up across free school meals pupils. It's gone up across EHCPs and across all pupils. So we've been really encouraged by that, and we felt we were getting it right. Lots of positive student voice in the process, and lots of positive word from parents as well. So we felt like we were on the right track. And we felt really pleased with the offer we were making. We then had a group of pupils who didn't have access to the technology. And for those pupils, we prepared paper packs, and they were sent home with the pupils or delivered to the pupils, and any work they'd completed would be brought back via a delivery service. And then you get to this point, and we've been thinking about this very carefully, and we'll go back to our vision, which is all about equity. It's all about every pupil from every background having the same opportunities, you know, and our engagement level and expectation level. So if we look at all pupils meeting all expectations, it's over 70% across our trust of all schools, primary and secondary included. And yet there are a group of pupils who would like to engage, but for one reason or another, they don't have access to the technology. And so we began to really think about those pupils who do have online access, and every day there are new learning materials available to them. From day one, we run Q&A forums for every single subject area, and there's a timetable for those. They go out across the whole trust each week. So if a parent is stuck trying to help their child and not quite sure how to teach something with them, or if a student is struggling to understand something, an older student, there's a teacher, there's a subject expert on there who can help and answer their questions. There's all sorts of different assessments for different pieces of work. Some of them are instant feedback via quizzes, low stakes testing. Some of them it is verbal feedback. Some of them get traditional marked work with improvement points that they then need to reflect on and complete. And so they're getting a whole range of different interaction. We also launched some discussion forums where there'll be a piece of reading posted, and pupils will be asked to comment on that piece of reading. They may be asked some questions, and the teacher will agree to meet with them, say, at a set time on a set day with the rest of the class, and the teacher will pose questions to the pupils and they can interact with it. Sometimes that's all done live within an hour, sometimes it will be staggered over a period of time. But again, it's been popular because it's a way of students interacting with their peers as well as their teacher. And then on top of that, we have a weekly schedule of live lessons, and they cover all year groups, all subjects. And following on from the live lessons, work will be set, the pupils complete the work, send it in for marking, and then they get feedback. So whilst it's not ideal, whilst we would prefer to have the children in on a face-to-face basis, actually, it feels like a really comprehensive offer. And then you think about those without online access, and they may have some face-to-face provision if they've been attending site. They have paper packs, and they also have a huge potential for isolation from their peers, isolation from the wider community. We think it's particularly important to remember when we consider young people today, they communicate a lot through technology, don't they? You know, they chat all the time with their friends over social media. You know, they play games online and they chat via those things. And the way in which young people socialise today is very different than it was perhaps in my day, when it would all be about face-to-face. And so whilst young people have access to one another and teachers via technology, we think that will go a long way towards meeting social needs, if obviously not entirely, but take us quite a long way. And so I feel really strongly, as do others in our trust, that actually the gap between those who have and those who don't have is probably wider than it could ever possibly be. It's absolutely huge. And so we took this to the board, and we took these findings to the board, and we were able to show this data going up and up and up each week in terms of engagement and meeting expectations and all the positive word. And so we could pat ourselves on the back and say, but what about the other kids? What about those kids who actually don't have a chance? And so we made a huge decision, and we presented to the board a proposal that actually we would buy over 1,500 Chromebooks. So we've got about 9,000 learners in our trust. And a significant number of those did have access to a suitable device. But then a chunk of those pupils from Key Stage 2, beginning Key Stage 2, so Year 3 upwards, didn't have a suitable device. And what we believe this would do is plug that gap. So we have a number of pupils who may have, for example, be in Year 5 with a sibling in Year 7, so we would expect them to share a device one between two, but beyond that we look to plug the gaps. So we had this huge delivery that you can see here, and we have now issued over 1,000 of those devices out to pupils, and the feedback has been really, really positive. There's a very strong learner agreement around it, whereby if pupils don't meet the expectations, the learning expectations, then they will be given a warning, they will be given support if there are barriers, but if they continue to not meet the expectations, those devices will be turned off and removed and passed on to another student. It's been a risky decision, because obviously we could have put all the devices out there and pupils not used them in the right way. We had one particular pupil who picked it up at 9:30 and by 10 o'clock they were online. We had another pupil anecdotally who last week won an award in her year group for the most progress and the most reward points, and she previously had had no access, and her mum wrote in to thank us. And I was delighted by that, but it was a gamble, a huge gamble, and without the support of the board and the willingness to be brave and the willingness to look at the research and make rapid decisions, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
I think one of the challenges with that was that the Chromebooks were becoming quite a scarce provision. And so Kath said at the beginning of the day, she said, I think we could really do with a board meeting either today or tomorrow or Monday. And then by the afternoon, it was becoming clear that we needed to get a meeting within 3 hours. So we managed to pull the board together on Teams. And they were absolutely delighted. I think there are things that you have to do in education where it feels like you make a significant difference, and the payback emotionally from that is massive. And just the logic all stacked up. We might need to do research later as to whether that was the right decision or not. We'll see long term in the outcomes what difference that's made. But certainly in terms of instinct and what we already knew in terms of education, that was definitely the right decision. In one of the governing bodies last week, we had a parent who was saying that they knew of a friend who had mental health issues. She hadn't been able to get her children to engage at all because between the three of them, they had one mobile phone, and the mum didn't really have the emotional strength to be able to encourage them to learn. And it had literally changed their life having a Chromebook. And we were fortunate that we'd saved up, deliberately saved for a rainy day. And one of the trustees said, well, the rain's pouring down now. This is the moment we should spend it. Yeah, so it's been a really good thing to do. We've just come to the end of the summer local governing body meetings. So we had a run of them during June, and the hub meetings. And they've worked really well on Teams, and they've raised some questions for us. We've done a questionnaire out to governors, a self-reflection questionnaire at the end of the year, and included some questions around what we've learned from COVID and what we might do differently going forward. We're talking about potentially having Teams alternately, or we have 4 meetings a year for local governing bodies, either having an alternate or having 3 out of the 4 on Teams, and then 1 face-to-face where we might have a meal together. I think it's made a really big difference to how easy it's been for everybody to engage. So normally people are travelling through the rush hour, they're eating sandwiches when they arrive, they're not having a proper meal. It's tying down those who might need a babysitter to, depending on their partner or someone else outside the family helping out, and they haven't been able to put their children to bed. We had a meeting a couple of weeks ago where one of the members of staff on the timed agenda was due to talk at a certain time, and we managed to structure it around when she'd have her child already put in bed and before she ate. And so she just came into the meeting for that section. She didn't have to give up a whole evening. She just came for the section she needed to present in, and around that could fit some family life. And I think that is going to open up the doors to younger governors, to ones who have family commitments, to single parents, to people who have workplace skills that we could really do with, and who within the workplace will be able to make an agreement with their bosses around being able to take a little bit of time out in order to do a meeting with us on Teams. And I think that raises a bigger question as well. We've had discussions around the difference it's made to the lives of staff being able to work flexibly, and how could we follow that forward, either with PPA time or senior leader management time, so that they get this balance that there has been. One of the things that's come out of COVID is time to reduce travelling time and to have a time to focus on a long piece of work rather than just fitting it in between lots of other things. We're talking about splitting the governor visits between those bits that can be done on Teams and those bits that need to be face-to-face. So there's clearly a role for governors in coming into schools and getting a first-hand encounter with the school, sensing the atmosphere, seeing what's going on, being able to pick up things about behaviour, tone, all of the things that are really important in governors checking some of the things that they're told in meetings. But there are other times where a meeting doesn't need to be face-to-face. If you're talking to a Senko about some of the work that they're doing, or the chair is talking to the head about what's going on and doing a catch-up, that could easily be done on Teams, and it saves some travelling. It can be fitted in at the right time of day for the governor and for the senior leader. And then the first-hand encounters can be richer and deeper and timed in to suit maybe the beginning of the working day, but they'll be shorter. They won't need to be both the discussion and the first-hand encounter in the same morning. Every year we have a nightmare trying to get people to populate the pay committees across 10 schools, 10 different governing bodies. We'd really like it to be the governors. We can allow it to be governors from different schools that do that, but it's better if it's the local governors. And to be able to nip out for 3/4 of an hour for a Teams meeting will make a big difference. And clerking can be remote. That's been really effective. We have 2 clerks in the trust who are both really good. They've interrupted meetings where they've needed to. They've been able to do all the admin in the background. They've managed to collate the questions that have come through on the chat board as well as the ones that have been verbal. They've been really good. And if we needed last minute clerking, very easy to get somebody to come in remotely. I did a parent complaint meeting on Teams. I think one of the things that sometimes is difficult for parents is they're already frustrated, and then you're saying to them, but you need to come in between this time and this time for me to meet with you, and that means time out of work. Most would choose to come face to face, but there is that option. And we've saved a lot of paper, which we now don't have to shred. And in terms of being sustainable and taking things forward in that way, I think that would be really good. And I think increasingly we'll do a blended approach. So some people might join the meeting on Teams and while some are face to face. And we'll need to work through the logistics of that. It's difficult to feel equally included, I think, if you're on Teams, but there may be ways of doing it, and we'll try that. And with training, again, we'll do a mix. We'll do face to face, but also broadcast at the same time and capture it. And I think we need to think about, is what we've been doing right, or do we need to rethink some of the things we've done and the things we've focused on as well? Are the agendas going to be right going forward, or should we be tweaking them in the light of what we've learned? I think our resilience curriculum and our work on mental health has stood the children in really good stead, and we'll be reinforcing the need for that going forward. This emphasis on the vision has been revolutionary in what we've done, and we need to hold on to that. And the sense of belonging to the trust and being in the trust family. As governors, we'll need to look at those who are newly disadvantaged, the ones who've sunk into poverty as a result of parents losing jobs, or those who are now in a new group, really, of those we need to be taking care of, where the lack of access to IT has been a problem and there's extra catch up for them. And then there have been some who've gone through some new crises with domestic abuse, bereavement, other things that the DSLs are picking up on that we'll need to factor into the work that we do. The curriculum for next year clearly is going to be tricky. How much do we squeeze it? How much do we try and catch up everything we were ever going to do and what we were going to do this year? Some discussions around that. And the repeating question in the background of, do we really need to do this, and could we do it better in terms of how we do governance? And finally, one of the things that I think we need to think through and celebrate are the gifts that have come with COVID. We would never ever have wanted this scenario, but there have been some things that we've learned and we've done that are hugely beneficial to the trust, and will be stronger because of it. The networking that's gone on across the trust in governance to some extent, but more so across the staff, has been absolutely phenomenal. The senior leaders have all worked to make sure that staff are released so that they can look at the curriculums for the whole trust, and we're creating one per subject across the whole trust. And team leaders and just individuals in departments who are very skilled have worked collectively across the group on teams to prepare new curriculum resources and new curriculum themes, and we've been really impressed with the work they've done. We've had this shared VLE and staff want it to stay, and going forward we'll be looking at the research that will come through now about the impact of live lessons. With our sixth formers we're doing Teams lessons, and how we do remote support for some of the pastoral concerns that we've had. We've taken the opportunity to have lots of training going on in the background. 45 new DSLs trained online, which has again been revolutionary. We've done bereavement training with Winston's Wish and Cruise, and governors and LSAs and teachers have used some of the research-ed webinars that have been put online, and they've been brilliant. I really enjoyed the one on Rosenshine and shared that with all the governors across the trust. And again, it's that opportunity to do a bit of training that only lasts 3/4 of an hour. Really revolutionary in the way that we can take things forward, with governors engaging with the pedagogy and the thinking behind what we do. And then we've done some training in adverse childhood experiences for staff, and I'll be encouraging the SEN governors to do that as well. LSAs have developed specialisms in a particular area and done lots of research and reading. We've managed to catch up with all the risk assessments that needed to be done for the normal school day. Asset registers are ready, buildings have been painted. And the governor passion and commitment has grown, really. The commitment in particular to belonging together some of our governors have come from standalone academies or from maintained schools where they felt they had much more autonomy, and it's been difficult for them to adjust. But in every single governing body, we do a celebration and feedback to the board, as well as a challenge to the board in each meeting. And in the celebrations, everybody has said we're so much better for having done this together, and how dreadful it would have been to do it on our own. And that's been a real delight. And then this commitment that has always underpinned everything to equity and not an equal offer. I had a parent who was asking me around, why is it that you're giving some extra resources in terms of how you're doing things to some of the students who are disadvantaged? And I understand they're disadvantaged, but my child would like it too. And that sense that we don't all start on the same starting line, and some start ahead and some start behind, and we need to help the ones behind catch up. It's an even bigger commitment, and every governor is even more secure in that, I think, going forward. So that's the end of our chat. We're going to go for any questions on the chat board in a minute, but just to let you know that we have a webinar coming up on Monday, which is about transition from year 6 to year 7 and how some of our staff have been dealing with that, which is a tricky time, particularly for those students, I think. And the webinar and slides will be sent out to you, but we have information there about where you can find them. So we're going to go to the chat board now, and hopefully, so are there any, do we have any questions that anybody would like to ask around the things we've been doing? May not be. We've talked at you quite a lot. That's maybe enough and all that was needed. Kath, is there anything you want to come back with?
No, I don't think so. We put our email addresses on earlier, so we're quite happy to take any questions directly. If there's anything we can do to support them, we're happy to do that. If there are no questions immediately now.
There's a question around the response rate to the parent survey.
I can't see it.
Right, okay. So I'll read out the questions then. What response rate was there with the parent survey? It was similar.
Yeah, it's quite high. It was around 60%.
Yeah.
And we followed it up actually. So we did a parent survey to all of our parents. But because of the speed at which we were working and wanting to analyse it, we focused it largely on closed questions. We have a data analysis team, and so then they'd be able to very quickly turn that round and analyse that data. But in addition, we asked if parents would be willing to be part of a focus group. So if they ticked yes, we then picked a random sample from those groups, and we run 4 different focus groups, taking a random sample of the parents across all the schools and all the age groups to get a deeper understanding, I guess, of some of their concerns that couldn't be easily quantified.
And it was interesting to see a lot of them were saying that they struggle with motivating the children. That was the biggest thing that came through, really, understandably. How did we ensure that we brought the governors with us? I think that was partly about sharing everything with them. So we've had a new governor who's come recently within this time, and he said, do you always give so much information? You're giving so much information. But I think for those governors who've come with us on the journey so far and who've been with us a long time, they were really keen to know at quite fine detail level really what was happening in the trust, and it's been helpful that we've been able to share that with them. And the chairs have been really good. I think the chairs have been a good sounding board for the governors in their own little group, and then I've connected with the governors themselves. And I attend all the local governing body meetings, so I've been through all of the ones we've just held, and that's helped. I think that they've been able to ask those asides around what works, what doesn't work. They've come with some of those challenges that they're hearing when they're out on the street from other people, and then being able to bring those and get an answer from us, which has been really, really helpful, I think.
It's worth sharing, Chris, at the beginning of the academic year, we do run a session for all governors as well, don't we? Where we encourage governors to all come together from all the schools across the trust. And then we will go through, again, we restate the vision, we go through why we want that to be the case, and then key strategies that should be running across the trust in that year that they can look out for in their schools. So that's usually, it helps as well, I think, getting them on board with the trust in particular.
And I think that's helped because they, anybody who's been around in the trust for very long knows the mantra about any child all being equal, and that's been really helpful. That they've, because there are times when some of them are saying, but my child might not be getting the same offer as another child as well, the governors as well as the wider community, but they know why we do it and they're able to share that with people, which is really positive, I think.
So the learning expectations at primary. Yes, we do set learning expectations at primary. We started off setting them at secondary because everything evolved as we moved along. So in the first week, we were just setting work and telling pupils in secondary exactly what they should do. But then we weren't taking whole data sets and measuring that whole data set against whether they'd completed. Once we were doing that and we were clear about it and able to see the power of that, being able to chase up individuals or groups of pupils and pick out patterns, we introduced it at primary level 2. So primary colleagues are now again delivering the live lessons, setting work afterwards, assessing whether that work's done and following up with parents if it isn't.
Did we record governor meetings? We haven't done. We had one governor who recorded it by accident, and then we all had to try and work out what we did next in terms of the legalities of that. I think we would do clearly on Teams. We've deliberately chosen Teams and not Zoom because of the security that there is within Teams, and on that it does highlight it. It says at the top instantly someone is recording this meeting, and then you can work out whether you agree or not. I think if I understand that the question is around how easier it is for the clerk if it's recorded, so they can come back to it, I think. And we would opt to do that if that was something the clerk thought was helpful. I think probably we would get everybody to do a hands up at the beginning, so it was clear that everybody had agreed to it, so that we'd gone through the GDPR protocol. But I can see the value of that. I think it might be more tricky if it was a parent complaint meeting or something that was with somebody outside the organisation, but internally I think we would do it if it was helpful. I think the clerks have found it hard. They talk about it being very intense because you don't get those little asides that give you a bit of a breather, or the breaks where everybody stops for a moment to get a coffee or whatever that you might sometimes have in a long meeting. But they have done a great job. Yeah, excellent. I think that's it in terms of questions. So unless there are any more questions, I think we're finished. It's been lovely to share the journey, and if there is anything that you think we could help with or anything that you feel that you want to share with us, then the email addresses are on the information that's coming through. And good luck with the next few weeks. In Leicester, we've only got a week and a half left, which will be in lockdown because we're now in the situation that we're in. But I guess for some of you, there'll be a little bit of time still with the year 10s and the primaries, and good luck with that. And with preparing for September as well. It'll be an interesting term ahead. Yeah,
we do wish you all the best with it. If there is anything we can do to support, please do get in touch. And if you choose to follow the Trust on Twitter, quite a lot of information is published in terms of the approaches we're taking in a whole range of different areas, some of them focused on business operations and a number focused on teaching and learning too. So thank you.
Thank you. Afternoon. Bye.
Bye.